It's such a pleasure, and thank you for inviting me to this lecture because it's always a special moment for me to reconnect with the stingless bees that are you know not really that close to me right now. So they're in Brazil and in Palo Alto, but yeah, it's always nice to talk about them and specifically today, which as you said is the day just before World Bee Day. So really excited. And I wanted to sort of the title that I gave to this talk is Guardians of the Amazon Forest. And there is a reason why I wanted to give a little bit more focus on the Amazon forest is because I actually went there last December and I spent New Year's Eve in the middle of the Amazon and I wanted to sort of bring this energy from the rainforest and all the things that I saw there, including the beautiful stingless bees. So you'll see a little bit of that and I hope you like it. So, as Wendy was mentioning, so I'm a plant pathologist by training. So I have a doctorate in from Penn State, and I quickly joined after I finished. I quickly joined Mars, the M&M's company, because my PhD was actually on cocoa, the chocolate tree, and so they were very quick in finding me and hiring me as their head plant pathologist. And I moved around with the company. I started in Brazil. That's where I met actually Andre, my husband, and that's where we started a farm in Brazil as well. And then I moved to the US in 2015, first in Florida for 3 years, and then here in Davis, since then. And yeah, as Wendy said, we have a collaboration with UC Davis where we do research on cocoa, on genetics, diseases, pests, and I work very closely on integrated pest management to make sure that we find solutions that are effective and can make us more productive cocoa trees, but also friendly with the environment and friendly with farmers, which is our foremost importance. And then, so how did I get into bees then, right? So at the farm in Brazil, so we go there quite a lot. Like we spend at least, a third of the year in Brazil. But then during the COVID pandemic, it was a very interesting time because we actually got to stay the whole time of the pandemic in Brazil. I was working my California job. I was already living in Davis. So I was doing my job remotely, but then still, at the farm, and it was actually, I was one of the lucky ones who benefited from from the lockdowns because we, as we love the farm, so we love the fact that we could be there all the time. And what really I would say it's the bees really helped me in those times where it was very stressful, like for everybody, to see all what was going on in the world. And I think I looked for the bees into some sort of a place of relaxation, of peace. And I started actually learning about them and looking for all the different courses that I could find around the world about bees, right? And that's actually how I found the California Master Beekeeper program. So I knew I was going to go back to Davis at one point. So I contacted Wendy and say, hey, can I join the program? And it was great. We've done the exams on Zoom. We've done a lot of things remotely, and it worked out while I was there. But then also the fact that I could learn about those bees that were all around me. So stingless bees are present in those rainforests, and so they were all around me, and I really wanted to learn more about them and to be able to keep them. So since then I've come a long way. Where we have about 100 hives of stingless bees. We created our own brand, our Bee, and we get to bring some honey to California for people to enjoy as well. So it's really been a great sort of side business, side hobby that I've been able to enjoy a lot. So, but I wanted to share what I've learned about those bees, right? So you may wonder, what are the stingless bees, right? So the name says it all, right? They are stingless, and actually they do have a stinger still, but it's vestigial. They don't use it anymore. They've lost it through evolution, and so here you have four different species, for example. They all have indigenous names because they were actually very close to indigenous culture, particularly in Brazil and in parts of Mexico, as you probably know. Um, So the way that they've evolved to defend themselves is actually different. They've evolved bigger mandibles, for example, so they can actually bite you if you're, getting too close to the hive. They also evolved, very very, I would say, intelligent ways of, deterring you from being too close. For example, they will go into your eyelids and bite you right at the eyelids, right? Which which hurts, but it doesn't make you sick because they don't have any venom, right? So they're not poisonous basically, right? So very sort of easy bees to work with and very very nice to be around. Um, so in terms of the evolution, so we have, those big, families, right? Like the Euglossini, which are the orchid bees. We have the Bombini, which includes some of the bumblebees. And then we have the two, which are solitary bees, right? And then we have the two sort of families of eusocial bees, which are the Apini, that's where the honeybee belongs. And then we have the Meliponini, which is a less known eusocial bees, but there are actually a lot more species of the Meliponini. There's about 500 species. And among the Meliponians, we have two sub-tribes, which are the Meliponas, which are bigger in size. They are almost the size of the honeybee, or can be even bigger. And we have the Trigonas, which are more, they resemble more a wasp because of the constriction in between the abdomen and the thorax. But they're bees, and they can be small as a small mosquito. So they can be really small, and they have kind of different biologies as well. In terms of the distribution, so the stingless bees occur mainly in the tropics, right? So they're not present outside of the tropics. They can occur in the wet forests as well as the dry forest. There's about 474 species that were described in South America, about 33 species in Africa, and 98 species in Southeast Asia. That doesn't mean that there's no more species that are probably undescribed. There's one exception, which is not too far from us here in California. And I'm going to talk about this later on in my talk, but that's basically the only case of stingless bees outside their natural habitat. So, so as I said, I wanted to kind of bring a little bit of a lens through the Amazon. So the Amazon rainforest is the biggest rainforest in the world. It's a hotspot for bee diversity. There's about 5,000 species of bees just there. They're crucial pollinators to the Amazonian plants, like, for example, acai or the Brazilian nut are all pollinated through bees. And in terms of stingless bees, there's also a hotspot for diversity. So there's about 111 species that were described in that area. So if I bring my pointer, um, that's the place where I was over New Year's Eve. So really, kind of sort of central of the Amazon basin. That's actually also for me it was a special moment because I had two of my passions in the same place. That's the place where cacao was evolved. That's the center of diversity of cacao, but it's also a center of diversity for bees. So I was in my element, I would say. So. And one special moment, so it was a kind of a short trip. It was 4 days, but one special moment for me was to meet Mr. Barboza. So as you can see, so we crossed the river, and we were actually there in Peru. So we spent most of the time in Colombia, but we were in Peru. And because there's the border between three countries, so Mr. Barbosa actually represented, he personified exactly what it is to be in between three countries. So his mom is from Colombia, his father is from Brazil, was from Brazil, and then he was born in Peru, and that's why you see the three flags in front of his house. But the other interesting thing about him is that he basically was the only beekeeper of stingless bees that I could find in the region. So it's not that common, even though they're so present. And you can see how he kept his bees. He built those basically artificial logs with wood, and then he would have those bees hanging in front of his house. And then we opened one of the logs and we looked at the bees, and it struck me like how much he learned just by himself. So he didn't have books. I don't think he knows how to read or write, but he learned everything by himself, and it was incredible to meet this person who just learned with the bees and learned how important they were for the environment. And he also passes on the message because that house actually is also a restaurant. where the tourists will go and they will say, oh, here are stingless bees, and he will teach them about them. So we had a very, very strong connection with him, and I kind of wanted to share, how special it was to be with Mr. Barbosa. Um, so some of the bees that he showed me were very interesting. So we saw these are all bees that are found in the Amazon. So the first ones here are the Jatai bees. So these are actually found all over South America pretty much. So they form. So what I wanted to sort of highlight here is the diversity of the entrances from those bees, which is one of the things that characterizes the most the different species. So you see, for example, in the Jatai, they have this tube-like entrance. And an interesting feature of them is that they will close up the entrance every night. So every night they will build the wax on top of, in front of the entrance and close the door, kind of saying, nobody enters here. And then every morning they will come and reopen it again. And and see, it's very interesting. So I took this picture actually, right, like maybe at 5:30 in the morning, and they were already ready to get out and open the entrance. So very cute little bees. Um, then we have the yellow urusu bees. So you see they have this kind of majestic entrance with a lot of propolis. So these structures are made with propolis and clay, right? They will amass the clay from the ground, and they will mix it up and form these kind of landing pads. And one of the interesting thing about those pads is that they are actually functional. So because the bees are going to forage everywhere, they will get back a lot of different pests and fungi and viruses. So what happens is that because of those landing pads are full of propolis, they will basically clean up the legs of the bees before they get in and function as phytosanitary pads basically. So they understood IPM way before we did. um, then we have Melipona fasciculata. So you can see it's very close to the Melipona monderi and flaveolata, except that they're more grayish in color. And then their entrance is also kind of more, simpler. They mainly use clay instead of propolis. And then he showed me also some of his Captotrigonas. So you can see how they make this long tube, elongated tube, and then they will sit, they will kind of stay around. So that these are more populous hive. So they will stay around the tube and really be on the defensive. And they're so small that these ones are the ones that will get into your eyelids and really make you feel like you're not welcome. Yeah. So so this is really the world of stingless bees and the majesty of all their entrance and the strategies to defend themselves when you don't have a stinger, right? You get in, you make a small hole so that not many people can enter. You always watch your entrance, so there's always a watch bee, like a warden bee that at the entrance, or you're close to your entrance and you're ready to attack if someone comes. So they did have different ways of defending themselves and evolved in different ways. So I wanted to now sort of deep dive into one of the species because when of course we're in a beekeeping course, and I wanted to kind of be closer to that and sort of deep dive into one bee species because every species will have their own kind of sort of management. So we're going to dive into the one I have in Brazil, but it also occurs in the Amazon, which is the yellow urusu bee. And so the yellow urusu bee is a bee that normally occurs in natural nests or tree cavities. So they will actually go into the trees and look for those nesting sites. There are smaller colonies, 6,000 bees. Of course, as I said, stingless bees usually will have smaller colonies overall. Their size is about the size of the honeybee, a little bit smaller, but or depending on the species of honeybee too, but they will be similar in size. And then they occur in the Amazon rainforest and also in the Atlantic forest of Brazil. And they are unfortunately endangered, right? Because of all the deforestation going on, they're losing habitat, and so they're being added to the endangered species list. So I'm guessing a lot of you are beekeepers already, so you know a lot of the biology of the honeybee. So I kind of wanted to compare because it's also very interesting to compare the two and how they kind of evolve differently. So we'll go step by step. So the first one is the brood, right? So as you know, the brood for honeybees is a vertical brood, and they have the cat brood and the open brood. they leave the brood open for about 10 days before they cap it, right? Well, for stingless bees, it's very different. They will have horizontal brood, which they grow into sort of concentric circles, right? So, and then they have what we call an involucrum, which is a wax sort of, layer that they will build around the brood to sort of protect against the, predators, and also for thermal protection. And then they mostly you will find cap brood. You will not find open brood unless they're just built it. Because what happens with stingless bees is that they will close their brood, they will close or cap the cell right away. They will not leave it open for 10 days like honeybees. And we'll see a little video there where I explain this more. So in terms of the honey storage, so again, honeybees, how they do it, they use pretty much the same structure that they use for brood to store their honey and pollen, but except that they will store it at different places. So same thing for, well, actually different thing for stingless bees. They will actually have total different structures for storing their honey and pollen. So the honey will be stored in those pots. So these are concentric pots. They kind of look like little bottles or like amphors, right? And then they will have some pots for honey and some pots for pollen. So you can see here a pot that is full of pollen, which is really packed in a way. And then here a little bee kind of going out of the pot when she's just stored and came to store the honey. So I do have a video that I want to show you on how the bees. So this is the latest video that I did on basically a time course on how the bees store the nectar that will become the honey. So I'm gonna basically play it. So I hope this will play okay for you. So get this. Let's see. So what you're gonna see. So this is a honey pot here, and this is a basically the bees that are accumulating the nectar inside that honey pot, right? And so this video normally will take an hour and a half, and I speed it up for 1 minute. So you're going to see a very fast movement of bees. But what I want to close your attention is this liquid here, which is the nectar that accumulating, and how this liquid will go up in the pot. So let's play the video and then you'll see. So there's no sound in the video, so don't expect any sound. But you see how this liquid is going up. So that's basically the bees bringing the nectar in their crop, right? And then spitting it up right away. Like they will not regurgitate it like honeybees, but they will speed it up and then slowly accumulating it. So there's a couple of things here. So the difference between the honey from honeybees and the honey from stingless bees, that this honey actually is very high water content, but the bees will not fan it to reduce the water content, right? The bees will basically accumulate it into this pot, and then the honey will actually ferment because it's rich in sugars, and it will naturally ferment, and that's the way the bees have evolved to preserve their stores instead of dehydrating it. So my hypothesis is that the bees in a tropical environment where it's 90% humidity will spend a lot of energy to dehydrate their honey. So they actually found a much better way of doing it. Just bring in some yeast and bacteria and make some mead out of the honey. So they actually enjoy it better like this. So it's a different strategy, and that brings a lot of properties to the honey. The other thing that I want to bring your attention to, you see those spots are brown, is because they're infused, the wax is infused with properties. So what happened is that the honey, at the same time as it ferments, will also have this infusion of properties. So it's like, like you age your wine in oak barrels. Well, the bees actually age their honey in propolis barrels, right? In honey and propolis. So it's a very, that also, I'll bring that up again when we talk about the properties of the honey. So another thing to compare, so the cats, right? So in honeybees, we have the queen, and then we have the drones and the workers. Well, in stingless bees, we have exactly the same. So we have the drones, we have the queen that's a lot fatter. Her abdomen is definitely carrying all those eggs, and you can definitely find her very easily in the hive. And then we have the worker. So as you can see, the difference between the worker, the female worker, and the male is made basically the mandible. So the worker will have, is a worker. She actually works. She, she does bring food to the table. And so she defends the hive. So she needs those mandibles. Whereas the drone only mates, right? So he doesn't need those bigger mandibles. And he has also this kind of yellow coloration on his face, which distinguishes him from the rest of the hive. So they also have the unmated queens, right? So the princesses, right? They will look a little bit different as well. And the interesting thing about the biology of particularly this Melipona species is that about 25% of the offspring will be potential queens. So they don't pick one specifically to be the queen. 25% will be born as princesses, right? And then if the queen dies, they will choose one of the ones that is born to be the new queen. If the queen is still alive, they will just expel those princesses and go away. We don't need you because they have enough, right? So it's a different way of reproduction, but it's also it has some implications also for management because of course it's a lot easier to make a split because you know that 25% of your cells that are going to be born will be one queen. So they will pick one and your split will be successful. Then life cycle. So I mentioned that also the queen will lay an egg. So in the honeybees, the queen will lay an egg, and then up to 10 days, the workers will feed the larva and then cap it, and then the development will happen inside the cell, and then they will emerge after 21 days. Well, in stingless bees, again, it's different. The egg is laid, and then they cap it right away. It has enough larval diet, what we call mass provisioning, for the whole lifespan of the larvae. And then after about 13 days, it will become a pupa. And then about 19 days, the pupa will develop in an adult, and then the emergence will happen around 40 to 52 days. So a lot longer life cycle, which also explains why those beehives, those colonies are smaller because they will produce less offspring in the long run. So beehive and nest. So this is basically a cartoon coming from a very nice book from a fellow beekeeper, stingless beekeeper. So basically showing the different pieces of the hive. So the hive actually was developed by a scientist from Brazil that was doing research in the Amazon. And it's a very practical hive because you have the basis, which is where you have the entrance, and then you have the brood box 1 and brood box 2, and then the honey sweeper. So, but this is very nice because if you want to do a split, what you do is that you take the brood box 2, you put it on a new base, and then you put an empty brood box at the top. What will happen is that they will make a new queen, and they will start growing the rest of the colony upwards. And you can see here some of the pictures from the, so this is, so also there's a difference between a green brood, which is more brown, and mature brood, which starts to sort of dry up and become more yellow. And then you have the honey pots on the top. So another little video here. So this is a very interesting behavior that I kind of wanted to bring up from the queen. What we'll see is the queen sort of waiting for her cell to be ready so she can lay her eggs. And then we have the workers sort of tending her and doing the mass provisioning. So I'll play the video and then you'll see there's something special happening in this video. You can see the larval diet coming in the cell. And the queen kind of checks from time to time to make sure that things are ready. So now what's going to happen is that you will see a worker is going to do something different. She's going to lay an egg. So the worker is laying an egg. That's unusual. But yeah, she laid an egg, and then the queen is going to eat that egg. And it's what we call a trophic egg. That means that the egg is not laid for offspring, it's laid for food for the queen. And then she lays her own egg. And you can see now the egg of the queen, which looks a little bit different. And then you're gonna start capping the cell. So yeah, so basically an interesting behavior, right? Like you normally don't see that in bees, but they do that, and it's a recurrent thing. It's not like they do it from time to time. It's the worker will have a ability to lay one egg in her life, and that egg is destined for the queen. Yeah, and so you can see here a picture of an open cells with the eggs inside. All right, so now moving on a little bit more on to meliponiculture. So now that you know pretty much the biology and the difference between the honeybees and the stingless bees, what is so different about traditional beekeeping with honeybees and stingless beekeeping, which is called meliponiculture? So the difference is, I think this picture kind of says it all, is that you can have a kid without any protection, going to the beehive and just playing around with the bees, and it's easy. There's no danger. So it's a very kind of kid-friendly beekeeping activity. But of course, there's a lot more implications to it, and particularly for the importance to me is how crucial they are for the tropical rainforests. But the first people who understood about this, were the Mayans. Basically, they were the first ones to really domesticate the stingless bees. They believe actually that the gods had sent the bees to them to protect the forest, and the bees for them were a connection, a spiritual connection between the gods and the earth, right? So, and you can find a lot of scriptures of that. You also have the descending god, Amasun Kab, that you can see at the Koba, one of the pyramids, the Koba pyramid, if you've been to Yucatan. Um, and it's also interesting too. You see this sculpture here. It's showing one of a colony of stingless bee, and it's believed that when they saw the way that bees were building up, concentric circles and forming like pyramids to build their hives, it's believed that it was an inspiration for them also to build their own pyramids. So yeah, a lot of connections there. A fascinating world, and there is a documentary actually that I recommend, Maya Land, that is describing some of those relationships between the Mayans, and that still exists, that still goes on today. It hasn't extinguished. They're still doing a lot of stingless beekeeping. So, but the importance of stingless bees for pollination in tropical trees and shrubs is indiscutable. They're so important for the forests, and it's such a and the Mayas understood it well, because they're saying that the bees were sent to protect the forest, but it's definitely true. So the bees will go into those flowers that not even honeybees. Honeybees are present in tropical rainforests as well, but a lot of them will not go into those flowers because they're either too small or not really attractive to them. So they're really essential for pollinating of those forest trees. So I give you a couple of examples. So this is Tapirira guaninensis, which is a common tree found in the Amazon and also in the Atlantic forest. And it's amazing because whenever it's blooming season, there's so much nectar in those flowers that the nectar will drip out of the flowers. So I kind of try. I don't know if you can see it here. You can see it a little bit on the pictures, but there's definitely a lot of nectar, and they love it. They love that tree. And there's also those trees that are more good for pollen. So in the case, these are some of the Myrtaceae, and I will show you this video of the bus pollination. If it plays, yeah. So this is another commonality between bumblebees and stingless bees, is that they do have this restriction of the abdomen where they will, use to collect the pollen. As I said, Melipona culture is also a great way to preserving and educating through bees. So I'm doing a lot of work with schools, for example, down in Brazil and hopefully, one day here in California, is to basically, use those bees to educate, for, how important it is to protect the environment. And really you can do that because you don't need, again, you don't need to worry about there any risk to the kids, right? And they're usually very, very passionate about the bees. And for example, in that school that we're working in Brazil, the kids actually are the ones who are doing the divisions. The Melipona is in the middle of the school, and one of the activities for them is really to go there and work on the bees. So really a great way of creating not only educational programs but also diversification programs. So because of the high value of the honey, what we're also doing is working with farmers, for example, cocoa farmers, and also diversify their income by helping them producing, stingless bee honey. So yeah, a lot of avenues that exist and are growing on these stingless bees. So you may wonder, if those bees produce honey in those pots, how do I manage to, and how do people manage to get out the honey from the pots, right? So I'm going to show you a couple of videos. So the first one is actually, oops, sorry. Let me get out of the pointer because I cannot. um, Pointer options. I don't want laser pointer anymore. So this is one way you can extract the honey is by extracting each individual pot with a syringe, right? And basically getting the honey in the press. So as you can imagine, quite labor intensive. Um, so each pot will contain about an ounce of honey. So again, the annual production of the bees is not much. It's about maybe 4 to 5 liters of honey per year. Um, so the advantage is that the honey is a lot more rare and therefore can be sold for a honey price. And also the medicinal properties of the honey are also incredible, which I'm going to talk about. There's an easier way to extract the honey too, is like uncapping all those pots basically, and that's what I did here. So uncapped all the pots and then basically, flipping it around so that all the honey falls down in a container. So the honey is then filtered and then I'm putting it into these containers for maturation. So maturation is actually extremely important for this honey because as the honey is fermenting, and you never know, what fermentation state it is when you harvest it, it needs to mature for at least 3 months, 3 to 6 months, I would say. The water content can be between 19 to 36%, so pretty high water content. That fermentation will keep going for a while, but then it will sort of stabilize. The water content will come down and then you can easily bottle it and then ship it to the customer. If you didn't mature it, then you would have the fermentation going on in the flask, and that would be a little bomb happening. So it's very important to do that. So I do that in those containers with an airlock. So it's kind of making meat, so it's continuing the meat process that the beet had started, continuing to do it. So propolis. So the right term for stingless bees is geopropolis because it's basically a mixture. So they basically don't use only the propolis from the trees. They also mix it with clay. And so that's what it calls geopropolis. Geo to refer to the ground, right? The soil. They use it for decorating their entrance. They also use it for closing the gaps in the hive. And of course, we can also use it for our own health, so for our own immune support. And in the geopropolis tincture has a lot of properties and very close to the properties of red propolis that you can also find in Brazil from honeybees. but it's really really good for our health as well. The wax, so the correct name for that wax is serum. And the serum is actually built instead of the honeybees building it on the on their stomach. The stingless bees will produce that wax on their back. So it's a little bit of a difference too. And as I said, they will mix it with propolis right away. So it's you never see like whitish or yellowish wax with stingless bees. It's always brown, from the beginning. So that also brings a lot of different properties to that wax, and also that importance for the infusion of that properties in the honey. And then the pollen, which also has an indigenous name, it's called sambura in indigenous language. So it's stored in pots. As you can see, it's highly packed and very geometrically packed, I would say. The bees use it for their larval diet, and it can be consumed by humans as well. Of course, it needs to be dried because it's stored in a very humid condition. And it's also very acid, a lot more acid than honeybee pollen. And then a little bit on winter management. So you may wonder, like, well, you're in tropical countries. Why would you need to worry about winter? Well, it does get colder. It doesn't get cold, but it does get colder in winter. So the temperatures can drop down to 70 to 80 degrees Fahrenheit. And it can be very rainy depending on the season. So the bees cannot go out and get some food. So they need to have a good storage base to be able to survive those months of rainy weather. That's why it's important for beekeepers, so stingless beekeepers, to actually help them out a little bit during winter. So we usually give them, 50% sugar water, and we make those pollen patties, which are a little bit different from your regular, patties that you use with honeybees. They're actually surrounded by wax. So we make basically balls with pollen, fermented pollen, and then we basically dip the little ball into wax, so that makes it a nice covered, and so it really resembles some of their pots, and they love to go inside and get their food. So we usually works pretty well. And now into pests and diseases. So I would say compared to honeybees, stingless bees are actually pretty lucky. They're not as affected by pests and diseases as we can see in honeybees. Probably the reason for that is that they're less domesticated. So as you know, as we domesticate a species, we tend to outbreed some of their resistant genes and breed for quality or more like things that we like but are not necessarily good for them. So that's what happened a lot with honeybees, but with stingless bees, there's not much of that. Like they're still sort of in their undomesticated state, right? So, but I would say the main ones are termites. So termites are definitely like, present all over the rainforest. They're there to recycle. So they will come and recycle your beehive if you're not careful. There's black soldier fly. So black soldier fly, which is also known for their properties with composting. They're also very keen on going into the hives and eating some of that honey, right? So they will go into the little spaces if the bees are not careful, and they will lay their eggs, and then the larvae will get inside. So again, only happens probably not on weaker hives. Lizards, so they would love. So this is a lizard in my Melipona area that's just sitting around the hive, and they're just waiting for bees to come in, and they will just make their dinner with bees. So something to be careful about. So I usually have some sort of either a surface that they cannot climb, or some burnt oil that will deter them from coming as well as the termites. And then the final ones are the phorids. So the phorids are Diptera flies. So they're little flies that will be attracted by the smell of the fermented pollen and the honey. And so it's very amazing because they're always it looks like it almost appears that they're always omnipresent. So when you do a split, for example, and you spill some pollen or you spill some honey because you're not careful, they will come right away and they will lay their eggs into that spilled honey or spilled pollen. The larvae will emerge in about 1 day and a half, and then in 3 days, you have a liquefied colony. They're very efficient. They're incredibly fast. So again, that only happens when the hive is really weak. We have to avoid having, a weak hive. And also there's traps that you can make because they're attracted by the smell of fermentation. So you can make traps like little flasks with vinegar with holes in it. So they will go inside the vinegar, but they won't be able to get out. So that will prevent them from coming in. All right, so I'm gonna accelerate a little bit because I know we want some time for questions. So now a little bit more about the honey. So why is stingless bee honey so important and so valuable and so delicious? And I have people in the room that are very keen of stingless bee honey. So one of the researches that have been done, and I'm actually working with those people from the University of Queensland, is they've done research on the sugars from the stingless bee honey, which are different. Each honey will have different sugars, right? But when they started looking into those stingless bee honeys, they've actually discovered a new sugar that has never been reported in honey, and this is trehalulose. And trehalulose is also a dimer of fructose and glucose, but the bond between the two is different, so it's actually stronger. So what happens when you ingest trehalulose, your body will have a very sort of difficult time to digest it. So it will be slowly digested by your body, and it will not increase your glycemic index like right away. So it will be a very slow increase of your glycemic index. So that's been discovered, and then of course that has a lot of avenues for people, for example, who want to consume honey but they don't want the sugars in it. So that would be a health benefit from this honey. And so we've worked with this group. I sent them some samples of honey, and these are some of the results of this analysis. And what we can see is some of the Melipona species, they don't have as much trehalulose as we thought, but some of the others, like for example, the Tetragonisca has 4.4, and then this Tetragona clavipes has a lot of trehalulose, so it's 40% trehalulose, which opens the avenue for this honey to be very, very healthy. There's also other sort of either, folk remedies, for example, using stingless bee honey in your eyes. I mean, we say folk remedies, but it's also shown to be working. Like, for example, this is my mother-in-law, and she applies it regularly on her eyes because that prevents cataracts, and it really has a cleansing effect on your eyes. And then brands like Chanel, for example, have discovered Melipona B enzymes that actually have rejuvenation effects. So they've done a lot of research with this honey, and they discovered that if you apply it in your face, it will actually bring your skin, young skin back. So very interesting properties as well. And of course, the flavor, right? So imagine this honey has been maturing for 3 months, 6 months. It's been fermenting inside the beehive. It's full of probiotics. It's full of flavor. So a lot of chefs actually have discovered this and are doing amazing dishes using stingless bee honey, right? So it has a lot of different. It's very floral. It's very it has some acidity in it. It's very fruity as well. So imagine all the different dishes that you can do with it. And amazingly, in places like Brazil, for example, where this is becoming more and more common, we can say that imagine if one honeybee species can produce 10 or 20 different monofloral honeys. Imagine with 100 different stingless bee species, each one pollinating 100, like 10 or 20 different flowers. The infinity of flavors and colors and essences is incredible. So all this has been explored also by this natural biodiversity that exists there. Okay, so a few minutes to talk about my capstone project, so the Plebea project. So I started the talk saying that the bees only occur in the tropical forests, right? And there was only one exception. It was in California. And yes, we do have a stingless bee species in Palo Alto specifically, and I'm going to explain you how. And I didn't bring it, myself. I don't want to be accused of that. No, it was actually brought intentionally, but it was brought 70 years ago, so a long time ago, where we didn't have all those biodiversity rules. So when I was starting to do my literature research for my capstone project, of course I started looking into stingless bees around California, right? Like thinking that maybe that could happen. And I was really surprised to actually find an article that described exactly that. Like there was colonies that were recently discovered of stingless bees in Palo Alto. So that article was written by Robin Agarwal, who's now a very good friend. And of course, I contacted her because her article kind of described all the people I needed to contact for my project. And one of them was Dr. Martin Hauser, who is the head biosystematist at the CDFA, and who actually got the first sample of those stingless bees in his collection, and who first described them. So, and these are some of his slides as well. So this is the plebea bee. So you can see the size difference between the plebea and the stingless bee and the honeybee, and then some of the morphology. So the first time Martin got a sample of these bees, he really thought, someone was making a joke on him, because he was like, no, this is not possible. It's like seeing a kangaroo in your backyard in California, right? It's not possible. So he really didn't understand how they got there, but he did identify them as Plebea emerina once he sent them to a fellow taxonomist in Brazil, and then he did know that they were from Brazil. So for the little story, so the first basically report of those bees after in recent times was in 2014 in that backyard tree where the bees were swarming, and someone called basically the insect exterminator because they thought they were wasps. And luckily, that insect exterminator was very smart. So instead of killing the bees, he sent the sample to Martin, and that's when Martin actually discovered that there were those bees. So that tree eventually fell down in 2019. And actually, that's if I had started my project back then, I would have been very, very successful, because that's the exact moment where, there was a colony inside the tree, and I could have taken that colony and put it into a hive, which is what I would, intend to do in my project. But unfortunately, that was before. And so these are some parts of that hive. And so if we do a chronology, so in 2013, that was the tree that fell, and that was the first report. So between that time where, between 2013 and 2021, basically, or 2018, nothing really happened. Like Martin knew that, there were some bees from Brazil, but he didn't know exactly why or how come they were there. And then another colony was found in a common garden, in a public garden, the Gamble Garden. And this guy, Richard Hayden, started taking pictures of those bees, and he started actually asking people to start taking pictures through iNaturalist. So they created these Brazilian stingless bees of the San Francisco Bay Area, and people started looking at them and like posting pictures. And as you know, on iNaturalist, many experts can actually comment and look at the bees and stuff like that. So some of those pictures came down to this guy who was researching stingless bees back in Baton Rouge, I think. And he found this paper where they were basically the paper was describing exactly what happened. So, and that was a paper from Paulo Nogueira Neto, who's a prominent bee scientist who's passed now. But at the time, he was basically trying to see if inbreeding populations of stingless bees would be able to survive in a new environment. So basically saying, well, most of the bee geneticists will say that small populations of bees will eventually collapse because of the inbreeding factor. But I wanted to show that that may not be the case. So that's why he sent a bunch of different colonies to the US. So he actually sent them to Logan, to Davis, he sent them to Bellsville, but only the one in Palo Alto survived. So, and that's kind of the report that we know from, and this is an entomologist that got the bees. He eventually passed in 1962. And after that, nobody heard about those bees, and nobody heard about what happened. They were probably just in his garden and kind of starting doing their own life. So in terms of chronology, so this is the red dot is where the bees were first reported. The star is where the entomologists had the first bees, the first colonies, and the yellow dots is where the bees had been seen. And then in 2021, another fortunate event. So Anika Arnott, who was 4 years at the time, was just sitting around in a park in Palo Alto with Tarji Lindsay, who was her caretaker. And then she suddenly found two colonies of those bees. So don't ask me how she knew there were bees, but she knew. So yeah, so those were the first colonies that were found by her. And then now we have, kind of an idea of the spread between 1950 and 2021. This is how far those bees went around Palo Alto. Um, so that's kind of when I come in, right, with my master capstone project. So the idea for my project is really to try to bring all my knowledge about Melipona culture into Palo Alto, all my knowledge about stingless bees into the community that has them, because they are the only ones in the world that have those bees, in their backyard, basically. I've been doing a lot of workshops. I've been doing a lot of, citizen science with them to kind of discover new colonies and also try to put those bees into hives to see if we can eventually have them in a school and teach kids about stingless bees and bees in general. So so this is kind of the idea of the project. So we'll manage beehives of plebea species for educational and conservational purposes. So what I've been very fortunate about is that I've been working with a lot of great volunteers. So Robin is one of them, the one who takes great pictures of the bees. But I worked, so the first time I actually went there, we organized a big workshop with the community. Anika was there as well. And so one thing you can do, for example, in terms of citizen science project, is to put those hive lures, which are basically plastic soda bottles covered with craft paper and plastic cover to protect for rain, and then primed with propolis from the bees, and then eventually, so the swarms will come into the bottles because they think it's a cavity, and then you can transfer that colony into a real hive. So that works very well in Brazil. So we tried it there. And this is another volunteer there, Annie Carl, who's actually from Brazil as well. And she's heading the community garden in Palo Alto. And she's helped me also put some of those lures there. So eventually we put about 70 lures around Palo Alto. And so yeah, we're still kind of waiting for for his farm to come in. I mean, I'm not surprised either because those populations are probably pretty limited as well. So and the chance of a bee really finding those lures is pretty small. But we're still waiting. And the other things that we've done also with volunteers. So this is Brian Donahue also, who was a great help for building beehives, and then also Corey from the Gamble Garden. So we're basically building already meliponaries. So these are sites where we have the beehives, and then eventually when we'll have the colonies inside the hive, we'll be able to put them there for demonstration purposes. So we have two, one in Rinconada Library and one at the Gamble Garden. And so these are some of the tree colonies that we can see there. So they're in the trees, so we can definitely see them going around. And we've discovered more colonies since then. So it's been great to work with the community there. So another method we've been trying is the trap out method. So which is basically putting a hive in front of the entrance of the bees, and eventually have them colonize the bees. So you can see here in the tube how the bees are kind of going through the hive and then occupying the space and then flying again to get their food. So, and this is Sarah Hood, also another great volunteer. She actually has one of the most beautiful colonies in her backyard on a privet tree. So we've been doing a lot of experiments with her. So this is some of the updates from the trap out. So so the good thing is that they do recognize the entrance and they do sort of do the ornaments. They do the tube. So they do know that it's their house. They try to colonize as well. They put some wax in the inside the hive, and then here's a video of them sort of using propolis to build some of the gaps that you see the hive does. So they are very active inside the hive. So one of the reports that I have to do this is another discovery. So we discovered also that they like the pine sap for propolis purposes, and that's also kind of uncommon in their original habitat. Okay, so we did discover over the winter. So we know all bees had a hard time this winter, and that included also the stingless bees. So we actually did see quite some mortality inside the hives. We wondered about what was going on, and so we sent some samples for analysis, and we did detect some viruses. So we detected the deformed wing viruses and also sackbrood virus. So again, not cause and effect. All bees can have viruses, but this actually was the first time we actually analyzed viruses in stingless bees in the U.S. So we think it's an interesting finding as well, to see that. So we're doing that in collaboration with Jason Graham, who's a bee scientist located in the Bay Area, and also Dave Wick, who has a company that does this kind of analysis. So it's been great to work with those guys. Interestingly, the hive, for example, that died off and had viruses is coming back and is thriving again. So it seemed interesting how these cycles of these bees are happening. So they have a mass die off, but then they swarm again. They come back and they thrive the whole summer, and then they survive over winter. I mean, they've been doing this for 70 years, so it's not now that things were going to change, but it's kind of interesting to see how things are going. And then so we've changed our strategy. Now we're putting the trap. Now the traps are the hives, and those hives actually are the ones where they were nicely colonizing it and propolizing it. So we're hoping that this summer they will choose one of those homes to relocate eventually. Some of the outputs of this project. So, a lot of, I did a poster presentation at a big conference in Brazil. We had quite a lot of coverage in Palo Alto itself, with the, local journals. Also, the high school students also made a nice article in the local journal, the local newspaper. And then, I also met Matteo Kaiser through this project. Matteo, who's also a master beekeeper, and he helped me build up the site for the project. So really grateful for all the help with everybody. So if you do live around Palo Alto, log into the iNaturalist site and go and take a picture of the plebea bees, and also plant, or if you travel around Palo Alto, you can do that. And also, plant some of the species that will fit those bees. So they haven't really left Palo Alto. They love Palo Alto. And so I do have a limited supply of stingless bee honey and Melipona propolis. So you can go to the arimubee.com site, and then, as I say, not much, but just for you to discover that new honey. And that's it. Sorry that I made it up to the hour, but that might be
Oh,
a
perfect.
question.
Thank you. It was a delight to take a trip to the Amazon rainforest and wind our way back somehow to California to discover the species of bees there. It's fabulous. Um, I learned a lot. Anybody out there in our audience have any questions for